Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and very welcome to the Good Summit. You've probably had lots of welcomes if you're at some sessions today, but especially welcome to the session here on sport. I have got three panellists, and I think it's quite funny actually. Somebody just mentioned that two of the guys are benched, Trevor and Hugo, just for the moment. I will introduce them in a few minutes because we have Amina Moustafa here. She has to leave to catch a flight, so we thought we'd give the ladies a priority today. So the lads, you're the subs, okay? We'll bring you on in a few minutes. So thank you very much. Just to introduce the topic and what we're going to be talking about, I'm the head of sport here in Trinity College, and I'm very honoured and privileged to be talking to these three panellists today and with you all at the Good Summit. But I would like to just highlight some of the things about sport that we're going to be talking about, and just so we can appreciate the context. Sport has a unique ability to drive inclusion, teamwork, cooperation and fun that crosses the lines of many classes, gender, religion and anything else. So the panel today are going to highlight this, and we're going to talk about the area of sport and how it is increasingly being recognised as a force for good. For me, one of the most iconic moments on how sport can be great for the world was the famous World Rugby, the Rugby World Cup in 1995, which was hosted in South Africa. Many of you will know that at that time, Nelson Mandela, who had only just become the president of South Africa the year before, the nation's first black president, was up against a whole host of, I guess, hostility and deep-rooted unrest from heavily armed whites who were not too pleased to have a black president, but hosting a sport which was largely dominated by white males at that time. There was a possibility of rioting and worse over the final match, which was South Africa and New Zealand. South Africa obviously won that match, but Mandela admitted afterwards it was one of the most nervous times of his entire life, and you can imagine what that was like for him, given where he had come from. But one of his, the most famous quote that sums it up really for me is, you probably have already heard this quote, but if we think about each sentence, you might have heard the first line of it that would resonate, but each sentence in this quote really highlights the importance. So he said, "Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It is more powerful than government in breaking down racial barriers." I'm very fortunate in my role to have seen the impact of sport on so many people's lives. And I think that we here at the Good Summit and everybody involved can do good through sport. And I know I like listening to Michelle Obama. I think she's an inspiration. And when she said, many things, but one of the things that resonated with me was success isn't about the money you make, it's about the difference you make in people's lives. And I feel that so many of us are already extremely wealthy and should be striving for good in all that we do, and sport is an excellent vehicle for that. But enough from me. So we've got some brilliant expert panellists here, and we're going to have a conversation with Amina first. So I would just introduce Amina. She's a peace activist and has worked with Sport Against Racism Ireland. Amina is studying for her PhD in biological genetics, and she has a great passion for that area, and she's teaching as well in her area. She's been a social activist against racism in Ireland, a key player in sport against racism, and she's led female soccer team in the Global Goals World Cup. She's also active in the European education and sport movement and has been a vital part of the Space to Breathe project connecting Christians, Muslims, Jews, Irish, Palestinians, Israelis in human engagement. She has spoken at many forums, from a young age, using her platform to raise awareness of issues not just racism, but also groups marginalised from opportunities to participate in sport, such as women and girls, and is passionately and rationally promoting diversity and interculturalism in our communities. Sport has been a great inspiration to her in her life, so please, if you would mind welcoming Amina. So Amina, over to you. Through your experiences, how has sport created relationships through different communities and cultures?
Well, I think a great place to start to answer that question is where sport was for me at the very start. So from a very young age, my mum got me really involved in sport. For her, when she was a child, she wasn't encouraged to play sport. She was super into basketball and gymnastics, but within her family, she had a really large family. There was 8 brothers and sisters. Sport was encouraged among the boys, but at home, the girls were encouraged to stay at home and help in the house. So my mum wanted the opposite experience for us. She signed us up to absolutely everything. So from a very young age, I was involved in swimming, badminton, table tennis, Gaelic football, anything that was available in our school or in our local area, my mum signed up to. And even when I first started, anything she put our name down for. If we said no, she said at least try it, and if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. But for other people, they didn't have the same opportunities and weren't encouraged, whereas my mum had a negative experience and she saw how that had impacted her life. And I'm so grateful for that, because how I see sport, initially, I had seen it as something that was related to exercise and training, and that's what it's normally viewed as by a lot of people. But by being encouraged to play sport in so often in so many different types of sports, I was exposed to the various doors that sport can open for you, and because of that, I was encouraged to play football, like soccer, because when I was younger, I used to play so much Gaelic football. Football for me was Gaelic football. And I was encouraged by my friend who had started a project called Hijabs and Hat-Tricks. Her brother had set it up to try and encourage young Muslim women to play football. And they were just looking for players, and they had initially just offered me to play because they didn't have enough players. So when I initially started, I just did it because my friend was doing it, and I didn't really have an interest in football. But I was so involved in sport, and my mom had said in my head, always try it, and then you'll find out after you've tried it whether you like it or not, and you don't have to do it anymore. But when I did, this experience was completely different to any experience I've had before, because here is where I realized the power of sport, and how I see sport now is sport is like an iceberg. So if you think about Titanic, Titanic just saw the tip, and for whole my life I had just saw the tip. I didn't realize that there's so much other stuff going on underneath the surface, and now when I look at sport, I'd see it as sport and society are something that are interconnected. You can't really separate the two. So sport, in terms of opportunities and communities and cultures, like it opened so many doors for me, and now it's part of every aspect of my life. So any part of community or culture that and any relationship that I've had has been an aspect of sport. Like, yeah, if that makes sense.
Well, you've taken your personal experience and put it to social good. You've taken it as a social responsibility to do something good in sport, because you've done so much. You started a football program for girls after FIFA lifted the ban in 2004 on the head coverings. I just wondered, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how did you promote and encourage diversity through that process at that time? It must have been very difficult.
Well, actually, at the moment, well, just before I moved to the UK, I used to run the Hijabs and Hat-Tricks project. That's what it's called. but I wasn't the one that had founded it. It was two young leaders as part of the Sport Against Racism Ireland Young Leader Programme. One of them had a sister who wears the hijab, and she grew up with her brothers. She was initially the only girl in the family, had played football all her life with her brothers. But when she joined a football team, she didn't feel comfortable wearing her headscarf with a team of everybody who didn't have a headscarf. And she hadn't really seen anybody in her local area wearing a headscarf. So for her, she didn't have the confidence to play with, and as well, she had experienced discrimination because of her scarf. So her brother saw that as an opportunity when the FIFA had lifted the ban on the wearing of a headscarf to encourage young Muslim women in their area to play football. They set up this Muslim girls football team, and they went and looked for recruitment. They went and recruited young girls that were interested in sport, and I happened to be one of them. But I had initially went in as a participant to play sport, and then I made my way up. I got so involved in it that I took over the project after the boys, and that's something that they encouraged. They wanted people from within the project. They tried to empower the women that were involved, and the aim of the project was to challenge, aside from empowering the young women that were involved in the project, to challenge stereotypes, to provide an alternative narrative. There wasn't a lot of coverage of Muslim women playing football, so they provided that platform provided that window of opportunity for the media. Other people might have seen it as something negative, going and just filming girls playing football because they're wearing a headscarf. But for other young Muslim women that were wearing the scarf, that was their way of seeing someone else. They might have been held back because they hadn't seen anybody wearing a scarf playing football, saw it as someone else is doing it somewhere, so I can do it. It sort of bursted bubbles for some people, and initially it gave me an idea of a video project that I was interested in. It's called Don't Judge a Woman by Her Cover. So it was to, a lot of times people don't see, they have the preconceived idea that Muslim women aren't encouraged to play sport, and providing this media coverage for these women show that isn't the case. It might be the case for some people, but it's not the case for everybody. And it's challenging that preconceived idea that people have.
Well, I think you're a legend and a role model for many young women, and I don't think you probably sold yourself as well as you should there, because even though your personal experience led you to get actively involved, I think you've inadvertently lifted the cover on so many issues for women in sport. So thank you for that. Just to give us a little bit of a flavour of the work that you've done with SARI, and maybe just explain a little bit about that and your fight for discrimination and some of the experiences through that organisation.
So the Sport Against Racism Ireland, they have an anti-discrimination workshop that they carry out around Ireland and abroad. So what they do is they use sport as a tool to promote social inclusion, but also as a non-formal learning tool. So they go into different primary schools and secondary schools to introduce and challenge and tackle racism and discrimination, but they do it through lived experience. They introduce a game that's like a discrimination game where kids play a normal game of football, but they introduce rules where people actually experience discrimination and they're targeted. An element, for example, is that the captain is taken aside and all the other players are told, don't pass to your captain. Most of the time with young primary school students, they find that really funny and they're like, haha, like John is gonna get so angry, he's not gonna get the ball. And especially normally when we play this game with students, we pick the people that are really good at the sport because they're normally used to getting passes. And so they will notice, because sometimes if we chose a student that never gets passed anyway, well, one, it's going to be continued negative experience of sport, but they might notice any difference. So we're trying to show the people that haven't experienced what discrimination might feel like, what it feels like. And then at the end of the game, we bring all the students back together, and normally we ask the person that was discriminated against how they think the game went and how they felt, and then we ask the students to tell John what we told them not to do, and then they say to not pass you, and then normally it's like, oh, well, that's why I didn't get a pass, you know. But then we ask the students, why did you listen to what we told you? If someone in the yard told you to not include John, are you not going to include John? And you had the opportunity to say yes or no. You didn't have to listen to me. And most people are like, but you're the teacher, you know. But discrimination can happen in a school setting as well, where this teacher is the one that's discriminating against a student. And normally we follow that with a game to promote social inclusion. And we call it Football 3, so it's where there isn't a referee, and it's to promote fair play, gender equality, because normally it's a male and female playing together. But we give them the opportunity to introduce an additional rule where it'll promote social inclusion. And we do that. We've done it in Cyprus. I went to Cyprus. We've done it in other countries for teachers, to show them that they can introduce this topic through non-formal learning methods. Sometimes when a kid hears discrimination, they have no idea what that word means, or racism, no idea what that word means. And the best way to understand it is through experience. And normally kids come out of it being like, oh, you know, yeah. I don't know.
I think that's really excellent work that you're doing, and that, you know, trying to help children understand that concept, which is so subtle in many circumstances, but it can also be very obvious. I mean, you'd be aware that there was an incident this week at the UEFA match, the European Cup qualifying match between England and Bulgaria with the fans, and the Bulgarian fans, UEFA had to stop the match and give them 2 warnings, and the third one would have meant the game was abandoned. But unfortunately, the game finished. But there was terrible racist chants which are televised across the world, that children and young people are watching, and, you know, generations. And, you know, I just think that maybe you could just, for you, you're so passionate about sport and about, you know, the good that sport can create. You know, do you think sport is doing enough to help eradicate some of those issues?
Well, sport, if you say, is sport doing enough? Well, what is sport? Sport is us. We're the people that are promoting sport. So if this is shown in sport, it's reflecting the ideologies and the values and the beliefs that people have. So that's more, it's saying something about the way society is thinking. So really, we have to say, are we doing enough, and questioning our own beliefs and values. And if it's being, this particular fan community is chanting that, then within that fan community, the people that aren't chanting have to question where that ideology came from. And I know it is the responsibility of UEFA to put in place regulations to stop this, but also the fans need to question themselves and to do something themselves, not just put the blame on someone else, but on themselves.
I think that's brilliant. I don't want to keep you too much longer because she has got an airplane to catch, but before I finish up, if there's one last thing that you could leave us with is, you know, our hopes and your hopes for the future, for the good of sport. What's next for you?
What's next for me? Oh.
What's the good you're going to do?
Well, right now, the funny thing is, for most of my life, I've always seen the positive side of sport, because I had such a positive experience. But I'm actually teaching in Nottingham Trent University in sociology of sport. And when I was introduced to the other sports sociologists, they introduced sociology of sport as critiquing and analysing sport. But I haven't actually heard a single positive thing they said. Every single thing they were talking about was related to violence in sport, the lack of representation of women in sport, concussion and injury in sport. So when I was asked to come and talk about it here, about the good of sport, I had to remind myself, because I had been surrounded by so many people saying negative things, and because I had to teach that. So I had to like learn what they were saying so I could tell the students. So I think for me, I just need to provide students with that alternative narrative to show them. I know all the lecturers right now are talking about the negative elements of sport, but I think it's important to acknowledge that sport isn't just sport, you know, it reflects our beliefs, and sort of bringing it on to what I said before, that understanding the relationship between sport and society gives us the opportunity to make informed decisions about how we participate in sport. And that's what I want to show people, that you have the opportunity to transform sport, and it's just up to you whether you make that a positive or negative experience.